it is not advantageous for me to be utilizing the part of my brain that does high-level communication and sitting there hoping that I can get to my gun fast enough if this person decides to act. He's in the car, he's got a knife to his throat demanding mom to come out. And he just wanted his mom to hear him out because they hadn't seen him in so long, refused to visit him, didn't put money on his books type thing. These are all things he's telling me. And he wanted to die or talk to mom. There is a type of narcissism that is called closet narcissism, where the person is very good at being a victim regularly. But when people are empathetic or sympathetic to them, it feeds them. So if you run into that individual that has now committed a crime and the negotiator is employing empathy with them, all it's doing is feeding them, and eventually they'll get bored with that individual.
That cigarette in John Daly's mouth, there's actually a recording device separate from this. Yes.
Yeah. So
we try to make it real cold in here, like an interrogation.
Yeah,
We're trying to make it real
exactly.
uncomfortable, so you start giving up the juice.
Interrogating the interrogator.
So far, we doing okay?
Yeah.
Technique wise.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
We're good.
Yeah. We definitely want a critique after this. Like, how are we doing?
Yeah.
Are we fit for the job?
Yeah. Are
we in?
we getting the information out of people that we really need to
Yeah,
get?
exactly. Hey, that's a good point.
So Ryan was a Navy SEAL, so we're well versed in waterboarding as well. We don't like to go there, but we've been known to.
If I see a bucket of water and some bags coming in, I'm
if
worried.
you see Phil coming in with a bucket,
Yeah. So, I'm excited to talk to someone who's done negotiation. I mean, this is something I think all kids kind of grow up and be like, this would be cool to do, right? It's highlighted, I feel like, too, on a lot of shows and TV as this great, amazing job. But what is the job? Like,
it's a complication of communication and compassion and empathy and trying to really go beyond what law enforcement teaches us, because from day one, you're taught that everyone's a threat, or I should say everyone's a potential threat, that you need to act accordingly. And there's I think the modern is act nice, be respectful, but always have a plan to do violence.
yeah.
And when you're a negotiator, you're not abandoning that, right? But your position is so much different, and you're tapping into the humanity of you and having to say, look, this individual has done something that is most likely very bad, because if negotiators are involved, it's gone beyond that patrol level of, somebody shoplifted. When negotiators are involved, it's homicide, armed robbery, kidnap. And you're having to put that aside for that individual and tap into your humanity, and remembering that no matter what that person has done, that they still have humanity that exists, and then connecting those two.
That's got to be hard, right? I mean, maybe you're negotiating with someone who's just killed a bunch of people, and for you to step back and to treat that person with humanity, is that challenging?
Very, very. Now, I have not personally dealt with that individual. I've dealt with child molesters. I've dealt with people who have committed violent crimes.
Yeah, I mean,
that's probably worse. Yeah.
But my partner, he and I are the full-time folks at our department, and he's dealt with somebody who killed their family that day, and talking to them and trying to work through that with them. So it does exist, it does happen, and we're prepared for the worst case scenario with people and their deeds, unfortunately.
So I couldn't imagine having to go through talking to someone who's just molested a child. Like, what goes through your mind? What do you have to do? Some kind of preparation, mental preparation, or are you just, you've done this long enough that you go in there with no emotion?
And so if I went in with no emotion, that would be tough, because one of the interesting indicators that you learn as a negotiator, and if you delve into the science of communication and social engineering, is if you come to the table and you show no emotion, or you try and poker face it, that at a evolutionary level to all of us is a threat.
It's a threat. Okay.
Because that indicates to the person across the table, you're hiding something. They know that. They know that. And you all have been trained in that. You know that. Somebody that is giving you no emotion, something's up. And that could be because they're concealing something, or because there's something not right, potentially mental health wise. So I have to find a way to, and I should say we have to find a way to set aside the evil that has happened, and then sit there and try and find the connection. Find the father that once was, the brother that once was, the student, the person who was a child at one point and may have been victimized themselves. And so it's almost like you're peeling back this onion while you're talking with these people that have done terrible things, and still trying to find where things went wrong and how we can help them in that moment to see that they are still a human being.
Do you find that a lot of these people have a similar maybe thing in their past, or a similar personality trait, or is everybody a little bit different?
I would go with the latter, that everybody's different. And going in with any kind of schema to try and deal with people, it just doesn't work. I think that if we approach them with the individuality and then get curious in the process, that aids in the connection a lot more. Because if I try to put people in boxes, people tend to not like that, especially when you're trying to do genuine communication with them.
Most of them, are they intelligent? They just have lost their way? Or do you have a lot of low IQ people, or is it a combination?
I think there's a combination, and it depends on the crime, right? If I'm in there and somebody takes a Circle K hostage, let's just throw an example out there,
Okay.
and they got caught trying to armed robbery $250 out of the register.
So we're in Apache Junction right now, just to get the visual.
You're looking at this individual and going, okay, there's a potential that there was desperation involved or some really bad decision making, right?
Yeah, I think, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you have a couple of different types. You have people that maybe they don't have any emotion themselves and they do bad things, and that's just who they are. That's what they've grown up as. And then you have other people that are probably, maybe they did something and got scared, real scared, like, oh man, what's going to happen? And they stopped thinking, and they find themselves in that situation where they think, wow, I got to take hostages, or I got to, you know what I mean? Like it's like the hit and run person. I think most people's instinct will go, oh man, I just hit somebody, I got to stop. Then they start thinking, but then I'm going to go to jail. What if this person dies? What if then now they're totally off the rails and they're not thinking clearly, and then then they leave and you're like, dude, you have a license plate, a register, like they know who you are. Yeah. People that bail out of the car and take off, I'm like, you don't think they're just going to come to your house like later tonight?
Yeah, panicked emotion takes over. And so many times it is that panicked emotion. And I think that officers as a whole, with their basic training and the experiences they have on the street, they get compassion fatigue, and they forget that anybody can be panicked, make bad decisions. Now, on the other end, the people you were talking about before, I train negotiators specifically on dealing with narcissists, identifying it, managing it, because that is a very real thing. And there are people that are narcissistic and less often psychopathic or antisocial. Those folks, they're unique in how you have to approach them. And a narcissist does not equal a psychopath. So then those have their own nuances.
Yeah,
so
first you got to identify what you're dealing with here.
Absolutely. We start with the basics, always connection, empathy, active listening, but then we can evolve. And that is the job of being a professional negotiator. Is we don't just come to the table and go, we're just going to actively listen. And my boss, he always talks about this, is like, you can't just do that, because then you get into this circle with them and they're sucking the empathy out of you. And some people love that. The reality is you're using active listening skills and social influence skills with a purpose. And now we're trying to influence them to make better decisions that day.
How many women are negotiators?
So we have about, I'd say 20% of our team. What I have seen is statewide, it tends to attract more women's interest, but the problem becomes the time, the call out, and it depends on your agency. And so that sometimes can be a detractor. But to be honest, from a baseline standpoint, women are better negotiators. Now, you can train anybody, and then their level of passion dictates where they go with that. But I think women employ empathy better. They're better at being compassionate. And so it's not as hard to train them the basics of the craft.
Do departments actively seek women because of those traits?
So I haven't seen negotiators go out and actively say, hey, this is what we're looking for. We're looking more of that personality type and somebody that can not only use compassion in action, but they're also okay under pressure, because there is a lot of pressure associated with it. You're the negotiator there at the scene, but tactical is still demanding things, because the safety of the scene always takes precedence. And you may be trying to connect with this individual on a deep level and trying to get them to think about what they're doing. And at the same time, tactical is going, but I need you to tell them this, and I need you to make sure they understand that. And that becomes the balance. So they have to, the individual, whatever sex they are, has to have the ability to utilize the skills under pressure from people that are from the outside and may not understand what we're doing.
So you have when you go onto a scene, when you see in the movies, when Denzel Washington shows up, he's the man and nobody gets to tell him what to do. And this is my scene, and he'll walk in without his vest on and do all the crazy stuff.
I'm sure that's how it happens.
I was just going to, obviously they're going to defer to you on a lot because you're the specialist, right? But are you still at a certain point, there's a senior advisor, officer, lieutenant, whatever there that's going to go, we're done negotiating, we're going in, we're going to do what we have to do. Is that?
Absolutely. The tactics always take precedence, because the safety of the public, the officers, and that individual always come into play. The negotiator plays a role in sharing thought processes, sharing a profile of the individual, sharing danger potential, violence potential. But the tactical decision ultimately is what will make the final. We will always give our advice, but there is a point when somebody goes, we're done doing the active listening. I need you to make sure they understand this, this, and this before we start taking action.
Okay.
So lay out I would say, a common scene. I think when we think of hostage negotiators or any kind of negotiator, we think of Die Hard, when he's in there about to blow up a building or something, and the guys are out in a tactical command center. I don't even know if that's, I'm probably conflating a bunch of different movies, but you're on a phone talking and they're calling back and forth. Is that how most of them go? Or are you face to face with some of these people? Or are you kind of outside of run us through a standard?
Yeah, so the face-to-face is, we like to try and avoid face-to-face. The reason being is, and you all get this, is it is not advantageous for me to be utilizing the part of my brain that does high-level communication and sitting there hoping that I can get to my gun fast enough if this person decides to act, even if I have cover officers. So our ideal is, let's be further away. Maybe we have somebody that has an eye on the house or the location, the car, whatever it is. But really being separated from that individual is best for our safety, just because of the cognitive load that it takes to be highly engrossed in a real conversation. If you, let's say you had a subject that did some armed robberies, and now he's been found and he goes into a house. We're going to get on scene. It's going to be 2 or 3 at a time. We usually roll with a team of 4 to 5. We're lucky. We have resources. But when we get there, we start assigning roles. Who's going to be the primary communicator? Who's going to be intel? Who's going to coach that primary communicator? Because that is the toughest position on the team.
It's like
helping
the spotter.
Guide it. Yeah. They're helping guide that communication. Because what you find is, if that primary gets too engrossed in the conversation, or maybe they're inexperienced, that active listening can turn easily into idle chatter, or now the suspect is guiding the conversation. Yeah. So you have to have that seasoned coach there to help them go, hey, we need to focus on this point they made, and then draw them back there. Or, hey, we need to start talking about what that exit plan looks like. So you have the primary, the coach, you've got intel, and then you have a team lead. Now, the team lead would usually be, in my case now, this. I never pictured myself that I would be here. I like talking to people. I love coaching. But the team lead's role is to really set the table for that team and make sure they have what they need to work. And then my job is to liaison with those tactical officers. Hey, they're saying this. You need to know this. Hey, tactical is requesting this. You need to tell him this. And that's really my job at that point, making sure that the scene is set so that the negotiators can work.
So how are you communicating? You call a phone in the house, or are you on a speaker phone, or megaphone?
So the primary way we're doing it nowadays, and this will surprise you, cell phone. Right? It's the most common thing, easy to use, and most people don't know. Even if you have a burner phone that's got no minutes on it, you can still call 911 and then they can patch them through to us. So that's a huge help. Cell phones help us a lot. The secondary options are what we call a NOR stand, and that's like the jack in the box. It has a hard wire to it. It's very reliable for the most part, and that can be thrown into a room. Mm-hmm. The third option is usually some kind of loud hailer. We use one that's very specific. It's a long-range acoustic device, and it penetrates buildings. You've probably seen them on the military side of it, but we've got a very small version of that. That's, I guess, like the mini version. And those are the top three ways that we communicate with these folks. The goal is always two-way communication, because if we're just on a loud hailer, that's a lot, and it's a lot for them to take in. And then they're not getting any ventilation of those emotions in that crisis.
So how do you get them on the phone? I mean, you don't know their number. When you say call 911, that means they have to initiate the call, I would assume, is what you're saying. Yeah. So maybe you get on your...
And that's why we have intelligence officers that are part of the team, and we have intelligence officers that work for our agency. And that, if we don't have the phone number, we're doing the loud hailer. We're telling them, hey, please call 911. We'll even voice phone numbers that we have out there. Sometimes that's a little bit harder for them to work through in crisis. But we will really focus on trying to figure out whose phone number it is. I mean, we've done it to the point where we've talked to people through Alexas in the house. And we knew that was online. And next thing you know, we're tapping in there. So it just depends on what resources you have, who's there. Is a family member there that knows what's in the house? Are there cameras? We've used cameras before with speaker options. So we get inventive and creative sometimes with these folks. But cell phone is the primary.
I know every case is different, but what do these people want? When you're negotiating, what do they want?
More than anything, they want their side to be heard before they walk out that door. They want everybody to know they didn't mean to do it. They want their loved one to know, I'm sorry. They want mom to know, I'm sorry for embarrassing the family. Whatever it is they want to be understood. Yeah. That is the biggest common theme I've seen. One of the worst ones I had in terms of emotionality and just somebody who was on the edge. Child molester, out of another state. He had just gotten out of Department of Corrections. Family had washed their hands of him for a decade. He gets out. He shows up here in Arizona, and he's at what he believes mom's work. She doesn't work there anymore. But he's basically taken the place hostage because he drives up into the bay of the deliveries. He's in the car. He's got a knife to his throat, demanding mom to come out. And he just wanted his mom to hear him out because they hadn't seen him in so long, refused to visit him, didn't put money on his books type thing. These are all things he's telling me. And he wanted to die or talk to mom.
It's actually sad.
Yeah, it's terrible. And
sad.
So here's something interesting, and this is where the team works. I'm negotiating with this gentleman. I know he's got corrections history. My team decided not to tell me what his crime was and why he was in DOC, because they were worried that might affect my communication with him. So you can see how the team makes decisions, and they're like, do we tell him? Do we not? And they decided, hey, you're a professional. We think you could probably handle it, but we also think it'd probably be better if you didn't know what he was in there for, so you don't change tone with this gentleman.
Have you, I mean, that's got to be with experience. They make that decision with experience because that does happen.
Absolutely.
And have you seen something like that in real time where a negotiation goes bad because of that?
So I won't say that I've seen something go bad because of that. But I think we always want to be conscientious of what the context is and who the person is. The things that I've seen where the outcome is not optimal is rushing, where officers get rushed to take the scene over from patrol, where they want to be, you can sense that ego is what's driving them to want to be the negotiator. That is the number one killer of a negotiation. When there is a subtext of ego behind the motivation of the negotiator, and that always kills.
But can't you weed that type of trait out before you put someone on the job, or does that just show up at times you don't expect?
You know, it's like with any other job, people can do enough of a facade to get on the team and show up nice when they're shadowing and test well. And you'll tend to see it in the first few months once you start putting them on the mic and you're like, oh man. It's not often. It's not often, but people do every once in a while get through, and they're doing it for the wrong reason.
How much, so obviously in this type of situation, you got SAU guys there waiting, ready to go. How much, I mean, those are door kickers, man. Those guys, they want to work. It's like military guys.
Yeah.
Like, you train me for a job, I want to do my job. You have to frequently like rein those guys back in, or are they pretty cool about letting you do your thing? I mean, obviously they're not going to.
And they're in charge, right? You said
they're in
the
charge.
Tactical units are in charge.
Are they usually really good about being patient, or you have the guys that are just like, put the phone down, we're going, like, you know?
Yeah, and I think when you look at the situation, that in and of itself is a relationship building. I remember when the team started, and we were a relatively new idea, because before it was the newer guys got assigned negotiations. And then my mentor was the one guy who was dedicated. And prior to him, there were a couple that were dedicated, but they were all tactical. So it was like, that was the job, like, oh man, I'm new, I'm gonna get signed in negotiations. And so when my mentor created this program that we have, it really created an opportunity for people that want to do that job and are not worried about the door kicking. Now, when that happened, now you have this separation of two entities. People that want to go get the bad guy, do the work, and move on to the next bad guy. And it has taken years, I'd say almost a decade, of showing up on every call we can, being there even when they didn't need us, and really trying to just be part of them without trying to make it about us. And they've accepted us. Now I've seen, absolutely, there's trust. And one of the biggest positive outcomes I ever saw in terms of the relationship between tactical and negotiations was, I had a diagnosed narcissist. She's a jumper on a freeway. Talking with her for, let's say, 2 hours. Highway patrol had been out with her. And clear signs. I mean, I use that recording in training for officers, and clear signs of narcissism. And I turn and give the assessment to the sergeant, and I away from her, out of earshot, obviously, and I tell the sergeant, hey, she's not going to jump, but she's not coming to us. And I explain all the reasons why, and it was just this look on the face of that sergeant like, thank you for being real and not saying we can negotiate this till the cows come home. And then they were able to do what they do, and they saved her. But I think being honest with them has really built that trust that you're talking about up, so that when the times that I say, can we have a few more minutes on this? I think we're getting somewhere. That has really meant something when I'm able to go the other way and say, yeah, we're not getting anywhere with this individual.
So you said negotiations was a part of the tactical unit in the past.
Yes.
And so were tactical officers, when I think of tactical officers, I think of SWAT team.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So they're cross-training between negotiations and SWAT jobs as well?
So they did in the past. And even now, because there are situations where those tactical meat eaters are face-to-face with these individuals, and they've got a gun to their head or whatever it is, taking themselves hostage. We do a training for them, because it's important. And I do that statewide with officers tactical folks understand what we do. If they're paying attention in the class, they actually know the basics of what we do and why.
And so then you broke off. Basically, now there's a place that you can go if you just want to do negotiations. You don't have to be a SWAT officer. Is that how I'm reading it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the way we run our program, and this is probably nationwide for the most part, is there are not a lot of full-time negotiators. I am super blessed to get to do that with my partner and be full-time, but that's almost unheard of. You're talking about LAPD, NYPD, maybe some of the Florida agencies, but for the most part, when somebody does negotiations, it's an additional duty. And you can imagine, I'll take one of our people. He was a child crimes detective. And imagine doing that 40, 50, 60 hours a week and then getting called out to do a negotiation. You really have to change gears.
Well, you would think, I understand because there's probably not a lot of negotiations going on. Well, maybe we'll talk about that next, but you can imagine that being such an important, when it's needed, how important that is. And leaving that to kind of like a part-time gig seems a little like it might be a liability.
It's incredible. And I'm careful to talk about liability in terms of, because I don't want to leave us or anybody hanging, but you do have to look at the world and where we're at, especially socially, politically, whatever you want to call it. And then you take these investigations that are happening of departments and they're demanding more communication. And the fact that we don't have more full-time negotiators nationwide it's interesting, because it is a craft that it is a fleeting skill if you're not using it regularly.
It's got to be, first of all, just being a person who has the personality to do it. It's got, number one, I would imagine it might be harder to find negotiators than it is SWAT team members. There's probably a lot of dudes who are capable of kicking in doors, but not a lot of people willing to listen and talk for a long period of time to try to get a certain outcome. That's a challenging endeavor.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. Definitely tons of people who want to go out and do that work and chase bad guys down and go in and get them. The negotiations piece, kind of like what I was referring to in the beginning, you're trained to do almost, I don't want to say the opposite, but it's not in line with negotiations or crisis work. So you do have to find those officers that have that, maybe an agreeableness, an openness, and a willingness to show compassion to people. And that's going to be tough, especially when you get an officer who's been on 5, 10 years, because that's where you really want to start picking your negotiators out of. Mm-hmm. Because if they don't have life experience, how do they talk to people that are having the worst day of their life?
I could almost imagine that position being something that the police department would contract out even. Not even look internally for it, because you, like you said, being a police officer takes a certain desire, certain trait that you would think a negotiator might not have the same types of desires, right? Like they're two different paths. Police officer, you got to be willing to go in, kind of get the bad guy, and that's an aggressive posture. Where negotiator, I don't see as an aggressive posture. You almost need to be. You have to have that reserve, and it almost would seem that they may not. The people who go in as a police officer may not be in the same. Very rarely, I would imagine, but I don't know. Maybe you have some better insight on that.
No, and I think you're spot on. Especially when I came on 20 years ago, this behavior was not celebrated.
Right.
I wrote that book that talked to you guys about, and in the book, I talk about when I started my police career, these attributes were not celebrated, and it made it a lot harder on me as an officer early on. I tend to be if you want to call it softer, a little bit more empathetic, and I got eaten alive by my training officers in my first agency. Mm-hmm. Went to another agency. They saw some value in that, and I learned to be a really good cop, I thought, in that agency, and it played out well. But I'll tell you what, 20 years ago, these skills were not valued, or highly valued, I should say. Now we're looking at a world where You have teams that have mental health professionals that are part of the team. They're civilians. Dr. Andy Young is one of them. He's fantastic, out of Lubbock, Texas. A good friend of mine, travel and teach with him. And it's pushed me. Now I'm finishing up a clinical mental health degree, in master's degree, so that I can be that for our team. So you're seeing that idea of, do we need to farm this out, or do we need to encourage our officers to go get further education so that they can fill that need?
You almost would think too, like it's almost a personality where you have the personality. There's probably that fine line of being able to do both. But like we talked about, like officers are on one side and negotiators could probably personality trait wise be on the other side. It almost seemed like even education is not going to change your personality trait. You know, like when I was in the military, it was clear, like we're all certain type of personalities, but you had an extreme personality, right? The extreme alpha personality, who they were all breachers. They wanted to kick doors and shoot people at close range. And then you had the snipers, who are a little bit more cerebral, I guess you would say, and like thoughtful. All alpha personalities, but different levels of alpha personality, right? There's a split there. And the breachers didn't want to have anything to do with sniping, and the snipers didn't want to have anything to do with breaching because there was a personality difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a good point. I would never want to put somebody on the mic with somebody that didn't have some level of ego, because it takes something to be able to say to somebody, hey, you're not seeing this clearly, but do it in a way that is almost nice. If you just put somebody on there that doesn't have that ability, then that would be a problem. But you're talking about still officers, right? Yeah. That have to have some kind of, you'd hope, alpha in them. And you don't have to be the mega alpha to be a cop. I mean, let's be realistic. But they have to have something. And in a negotiation, there are times when you have to come across, we could like to refer to it as like a red zone, when, okay, things are about to change for you very, very seriously. And now you have to change that tone with that individual. I've been kind, I've reached out, I've done X, Y, and Z, I've listened to you, but now it's time for you to make a decision. And if you don't have that, then that's a problem. So it's like that.
It takes a real special person to be able to walk that line, I think, between those two traits. It takes that right personality that walks the line right between the two, I feel like. And I would imagine it would be hard to find negotiators in a SWAT team or in any law enforcement.
Yeah, and believe me, there are some operators that I've met, and they're fantastic. They surprise you. You're like, wow. And they are some of the best people out there. But I think that is probably rare, and they're probably the best at everything they've ever done, right? That's probably, people like you all know. But that's rare. That is rare. There are people that are very focused, and it can be very hard to switch gears. And like I talk about, there is that cognitive load that you're not as safe when you're doing that communication. You just can't be.
Do you find that you can train people into this job, or do you have to really look for a certain personality?
I think we're really looking for certain personalities. And when you have to train them and you see that there's that struggle, it's usually the struggle of, they don't know how to communicate on a base level. So probably people that if you put them in a room, they would have a real hard time meeting people, introducing themselves. So they have a high shyness, if you want to call it that, or that they have such a high ego level that what ends up happening, and it's a bad habit we all have, is we're trying to connect with people and we always bring the conversation back to ourselves.
Yeah.
The vast majority of us are not doing that maliciously, right? Yes. You're telling me about your hunting trip, and then somehow we end up on my hunting trip last year. I'm not doing it because I'm being mean. I want to connect. But when you have people that do that as a habit and it's so regular, they almost cannot break it. And then every conversation turns into, well, I did it this way, or this is what happened to my sister. And when you're dealing with somebody in crisis, people become very egocentric, and that is an affront to them emotionally. So if you cannot break that habit that the majority of us have, it's one of the killers of the negotiator.
You had mentioned a little bit ago some challenges. Does that have anything to do with the consent decree that was placed on the Phoenix Police Department?
Yeah, I probably have to be careful talking about that one. Okay. Yeah. Anything that have to do with that, I'd have to be.
Well, they actually,
cautious.
city council may actually finally shut that down.
I heard,
Thankfully.
and so that was something that I've recently been aware of. But we've talked to some police officers in the past who had not been very happy with that.
So I work for the fire department, City of Phoenix. So for us, we were watching that pretty carefully because the implication was going to be, they're coming after you, they're coming after us next, type of thing.
There's a great possibility of that,
so
right?
it was like, and honestly, they said, the great part was they said, $20 to $40 million a year is what it's going to cost. And in a meeting, they were like, well, how are we going to pay for that? And they point blank said, well, we'll just take it out of the fund that they build fire stations with. Oh. So we were like, okay, so you are coming after us without even coming. You're already, what an absolute just disastrous, everywhere it's been tried, right? Yeah. Disastrous. It's like socialism. It's legit. Everywhere it's been tried, it's been disastrous. And it's then a entity coming in that has no, they don't know how our community works. And our community versus Los Angeles versus Philadelphia versus they're all different, right? So you're coming in saying, well, this is how we think you should do it. Well, cool. You've never spent any time policing with, Phoenix, Mesa, Glendale, and you're just going to come in and blanket statement, tell us how we need to run this. Recipe for disaster right off the bat,
Yeah, lot of challenges. And what I can speak to, taking it back to what you're saying, is I think that as a society, we're running into all these different demands, the loud minority that gets heard a lot of times and is causing a lot of change. And I think as a society and as law enforcement, we're trying to balance that and the politics, because obviously on the front line, we're not in charge of any of that. Mm-hmm. So we do the best that we can. And I think one of the best things that we've been able to do as a culture of law enforcement is be a little open-minded. Because I think for many years, it was like, we're not changing it. This is how we've always done it. Mm-hmm. And what I have seen is a shift nationwide where there is more interest in, yes, that's going to be challenging, but if people are asking law enforcement to be more receptive and try and communicate with people prior to going into taking action with them, how can we facilitate that? And I have seen that movement. I mean, it really is everything that nationwide I've seen going and traveling and talking to different officers. We're not going to change that. And we're trying to find a way to work within those parameters so that we can better serve the public.
Yeah. I think it was Hermeet Dillon. She's now, I don't know what her position is, but she's got some kind of position in the government since Trump came in. And she was talking about how she's ripped a lot of these consent decrees out, including Phoenix and many others across the nation, because they were actually looking at the data going, they're forcing states, cities to spend money that they don't have on things that are not working, basically is what it was. And so they're just pulling them now. But that's a good thing from what I've talked to from police officers who said the same thing, because they're on the ground seeing that these things aren't working. Finally, someone in the federal government was able to rip those out and hopefully save the taxpayers money. I mean, from my perspective too, like, why are we paying for something that's not working, right? Just because the federal government says says they want to have it. It seemed like more like optics to me than anything. Mm-hmm. So, let's go back to some negotiation stuff. What would be a standard length of negotiation?
Everyone's different. I can tell you that it all depends on the pace that a tactical unit works. So if you have let's say a regional, I was on a regional tactical team years ago up in northern Arizona. Those people are going to take time to get there because you have people coming from different agencies, different locations. That's going to take time. That would be like the negotiator's dream to be in that situation, because now you have time to work. If you've got squared away people that are close, they're coming fast, they want to work, it's going to move fast. Now, things that'll slow you down in terms of the negotiation or for negotiations to happen, it being the property of somebody else. You know, let's say armed robber goes and runs in the neighborhood and flees into grandma's house. Okay, well, we're going to be sensitive to that because that's not their property.
Yeah.
And we're going to try and do everything that we can to not damage that property with the idea that she's got to go back in there and live tonight. We are very careful about that. Another thing that'll slow you down, kids in a house, right? We're not going to go and start doing tactical actions that are going to terrify these children and leave them scarred forever. If it's to save their lives, that's a different thing. But if there are children involved, it slows us down a lot. So you're looking at, for the average call out for us, probably under 2 hours. Have they gone longer? Sure. We've had officers that were murdered, that we're going to spend every moment that we can trying to figure out what communication can be, because if there is a high likelihood of the use of violence on that individual, we want to make sure that we did everything possible to avoid that. Not just liability, but from a negotiation standpoint, the way that we look at it as a team is, if I can save an officer from having to seriously hurt or take somebody's life, and they don't have that on their soul, their conscience, whatever you want to call it, we'd like to do that. We'd like to try and save that from happening and save that person's life, save them from themselves in that moment, because they're the ones that are making the bad decisions.
You mentioned narcissist a couple times. Seems like you deal with them a lot. What exactly is the definition of a narcissist? How do you know?
So I will say we don't deal with them a lot. That's why they can be very challenging. I took that to an educational level. I've seen it in my personal life. And where that led me was to try and understand some things that I saw in my personal life for a very long time. And it made me want to educate myself. Next thing you know, I'm looking at it going, oh, well, 3 years ago, I had this individual that matched those patterns of behavior, and I want to try and help negotiators, because what happens with narcissism is they will take that empathy that negotiators employ as a baseline, and they eat that, and then they get bored with you, and they want to move on.
What do you mean eat that?
So there's something that we refer to as narcissistic supply. And a narcissist really enjoys the sense of people feeling bad for them. So to take it to a very basic level, you'll have a lot of narcissists that one of their traits is they don't mind being the victim in certain situations. There is a type of narcissism that is called closet narcissism. We'll just call it closet narcissism for now, where the person is very good at being a victim regularly. But when people are empathetic or sympathetic to them, it feeds them. So if you run into that individual that has now committed a crime and the negotiator is employing empathy with them, all it's doing is feeding them, and eventually they'll get bored with that individual. It's like the cat that gets tired of playing with the mouse. So we have to be very careful to recognize the traits and then switch our tactics with those individuals.
You recognize that in such a short amount of time, probably not even physically seeing this person, their body language or anything like that.
And that's why I put the training together, and I've taught it all over the U.S. It's funny because it's not the presentation that I've been most passionate about, but it's the one that cops love the most. They always want to hear the narcissism one. The identification comes from really paying attention and having the team, because sometimes when you're in the midst of it and you're the primary communicator, you're going to miss stuff. And that's why having the coach, the team leader, that intel, paying attention to the conversation as well, they start to catch cues of that narcissism. And sometimes it is as easy as, like the gal I was telling you that was the jumper, she literally turns to me and she goes, "You know I'm narcissistic. Next question." And that's one of on the far end of the spectrum of grandiose narcissism. They're not ashamed of it.
But I would imagine most narcissists don't know they're narcissists.
Yeah, so
I would imagine the vast amount of people in today's society don't even know the definition.
I know this is why it's so fascinating
Yeah.
because we hear it all the time, but we're like, this person's a narcissist. Well, he's different than that person you're calling. I don't know. I don't understand it.
yeah, so there's some interesting points to narcissism. First of all, there's something called anosognosia, which is basically a lack of insight. So if they are clinically narcissistic, we're not talking about the person that they go through a breakup and now they become very selfish. Remember, we talked about people in crisis become egocentric. That's just what we do. It's a survival mechanism. Like, it's about me.
Yeah.
That's not narcissism. Clinical narcissism is usually genetic or born of trauma, and it's a defense mechanism the person develops in themselves. Now, what's interesting is narcissism is on a spectrum. And it's not like the autism spectrum that we hear about. That's probably the most associated word to the word spectrum. Narcissists are really good at being flexible. They will adjust to that environment and they will move up and down that spectrum. So the high end of the spectrum is the grandiose narcissist that we've probably all met at some point in our life. They're the greatest thing that ever happened. They're better than you. They knew things before you. They almost have magical powers and their abilities cannot be rivaled. On the other end is that closet or vulnerable narcissist. They love being a victim. They love illness. They love to hear about illness. It's almost like they salivate when you start talking to them about bad things happening to you. Because what that type of narcissist does is they will take that and then they'll be like, oh, I'm going to call my friend and tell her all about everything I'm doing to help so-and-so because they're going through this hard time and how hard it's been on me. So that spectrum, they're really good at kind of snaking through, and it's hard to catch a lot of what they're doing unless you're really paying attention to the behavior, to what they're saying, and to their past patterns of behavior.
So that last one you're talking about, you could, because we've all seen this. So to kind of identify it would be like, my mom passed away and it hurt you just as much as it hurt me, kind of thing. You want that same attention. You want that, well, I was really close to her and I was really, and like they're going on and on about it where it's like, I'm not as affected as you are by this. What's going on here?
Absolutely.
Like, is that the kind of
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why they're exhausting, because in your mind, in that instance, you're like, well, I don't want to take away from your bad feelings about this, but you're really making this weird now.
Yeah.
And so that is why they use gaslighting so well, because they're so good at making people feel awkward, but awkward in a way like it makes you question yourself. And it's very interesting. It's very interesting to be around.
What's the deep-seated need of a narcissist? Is it attention? But there's got to be more than that. Like, what is it?
So it's funny because narcissists usually put out the aura that they're the greatest thing in the world, but they are a black hole on the inside for sense of self. And people don't understand that about them is they are very fragile. So it's like dealing with a fragile child is what I tell my negotiators.
Thick shell and nothing in the middle.
Absolutely. And so that's why they constantly need that narcissistic supply to fill that void that's happening. And it's very, where it comes into our world is they're dangerous when people poke at that. If they feel or perceive that they're being attacked, that shell is being broken, they can become very violent. So that becomes a problem. And then when you're dealing with that vulnerable narcissist, they tend to have a level of neuroticism that goes with that because they're constantly paranoid.
Neuroticism. Just give a short definition of that.
So it's like a level of instability emotionally. And it's because they are paranoid, people are going to find out what and who they are on the inside. And when they feel attacked, they can become violent.
I'm curious to know, you're around other negotiators on a regular basis. Do you guys have similarities, like your upbringing, or does it tend to have all different spectrums coming to like the same kind of personality traits?
They are close. Now, backgrounds, I say they vary because I think different factors make different people. But I met some negotiators that are very like me. You sit down at the table and it's like sitting with family. I'll tell you this, I've also met some negotiators and utilized some negotiators that have some narcissistic qualities themselves. And what's interesting about those folks, very different, but you can use them because, and I'm sorry to bring it back to the narcissism point, but it is interesting is narcissists tend to communicate on the same level because they have the same brain and chemical deficits. So they do not have the same level of empathy. They lack serotonin in the brain. And when they talk to each other, they talk the same language. So it's like brass tacks, this is what's happening, and they understand each other. So as a team lead, you learn to find those people, and then you employ them if you can.
Wild.
He keeps bringing it back to narcissism. Is he negotiating us right now?
No. What are you trying to say about
What are
this?
you? He's negotiating us. I don't.
I bet that you get that from everybody you talk to. Like, he's negotiating. Like, he's picking me apart inside right now.
Absolutely.
Is there a level of so a topic that fascinates me is, so like human behavior, psychology. It sounds a lot like what you guys. Is there any type of? Do you have to have any kind of degree? Do you have to have some type of? There's got to be some sort of training for you to be able to identify these type of qualities and traits. But it sounds like very much like you're legit having a. I mean, it'd be like sitting with a psychologist.
Yeah.
Where you're sitting here like our counselor or whatever, where they're basically. And really, most of what that is talking to people and get them to open up and talk. It's like. You're not necessarily diagnosing anything. You're just like, if you just talk about this, oh, okay, you'll start to realize yourself. Like most people go, oh, man, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I just asked you the right questions. Absolutely. But that takes a level of obviously training to know the questions to ask when you identify certain traits. Is that kind of a requirement? Or is it like once you get, hey, I'm taking this negotiator position, then you have to go through some of that? Or is it just kind of here's the curriculum, learn this?
So the basic, the true basic is, literally show us that you can communicate with people in stressful environment, and then we can train you up. Basic training. I'm part of that training. We do that through the FBI, and we partner with them, and I'm one of their instructors. After that, it's on you. It is on you. Now, I was lucky enough that I had a bachelor's in psychology, and actually, before I became an officer, I had a master's in educational admin. I thought I was going to be a programs director. Never happened. I met some cops that were in my program. They convinced me to be a cop, and I feel like I fell backwards into law enforcement. Later, I was like, well, why don't I try and use this psychology? Because actually it helps. So that's how that started. And then about 5 years ago, piecemeal, I started getting to this mental health program, this master's. And even then, very basic. Hey, this is what you do in counseling. I saw that there was a connection between the two, between negotiations and that. But the psychological stuff that I've been able to bring to my negotiators, it's all just been self-education, reading, meeting people, sitting down, having dinners with people that are smarter than me, and just trying to soak up as much as I can. And you can ask my family, they make fun of me all the time. I am always within reach of a book that I can sit down and start breaking stuff down, and how can I bring this to the table to not only my negotiators, but the state and to the nation now, because I've been lucky enough to travel all over.
You guys work with like FBI?
We do.
Yeah?
Yeah. We have close relationships with them.
And I would imagine that they have pretty, like a dedicated team of negotiators there, or is it kind of like you guys where it's just like part-timers and trying to get a...
Yeah, you're talking about people that are investigating all kinds of different crimes, and then at night they come out and they're negotiators. So similar situation. Similar situation.
And are you guys all kind of in the same boat in a lot of ways equals, or does the FBI, does it feel like that they're kind of the experts and you're learning from them, or is it a two-way street?
I feel like it's a two-way street. Now, I teach with FBI agents, special agents all the time, and I've never felt like they were lording anything over me. And in their humility, they'll even be like, hey, we defer to you. You all get called out a lot more than us. They are partners, and they're very good at what they do. Very good. But they have never come and been like, in the movies, like, we're taking over
this is our jurisdiction. Right? Well, too bad. Not now. Yeah.
Never been like that. And we retired. One of the lead guys this week actually had his retirement, and it was just great stories and laughs, and it was just a great partnership that we've had with those folks.
Yeah, feels like too being it seems like you would, in that position, you're working on yourself a lot. like your own way of negotiating, which by the way is a great thing, right? Like talking to people is kind of the main thing we do. It's like kind of what makes us human in a way, like one of the many things, I guess. But communication,
Well, that and opposable thumbs.
opposable thumbs is one of them, probably more. But communicating with people is so important. If you can't communicate with people, you isolate yourself. Humans need other people. So the better communicator you are, the more friends you have, probably the better life you end up having, all that stuff, right? So it seems like your job lends itself to your personal life. Do you find that?
Yeah,
fair?
it definitely does, and it's made me better. It's funny. I'll have, my longtime girlfriend. We have a daughter together. We've been together for a decade. She'll have issues, and she'll be like, "Well, how do I deal with this?" And I'll be, "Okay, don't send that text. Let's word it like this. And literally, I mean, I found myself thinking to myself, "Man, I should do this as a job, like consult with people and help them." But it really does. It's so much better for who you are when you learn how to be a little bit more patient. I mean, that's one of the most simplest things is to be patient in the communication.
But I also, like you said, I think people oftentimes when they're in let's say a challenging conversation, it's like a mirror back at you. You're looking at yourself like I've been the one that's been wronged here. See my side, and both people are trying to. If you can break through that, I think, which is what negotiation is, seeing the other person's side. They just want to be heard. I think that seems like that's a very valuable thing to be able to do.
Absolutely. I think the hardest thing when it's personal is that person, you have so many little ties in your brain to the emotional parts of the brain that if you're trying to negotiate with me and we don't know each other, it's a lot easier.
Oh, sure.
But you bring in your sister-in-law who you've had some run-ins with, all of a sudden, and you're trying to be this great negotiator, and then
The blood
I remember that time when you didn't return that wrench,
I was going to say, this is all fine and dandy, but probably doesn't work when you're dealing with your wife.
Yeah, it's tough. It is tough. And it is interesting because especially if you learn this later in life, I'll tell negotiators, like, do not try and go and employ this with people you are close to unless you're going to warn them, because everybody has a baseline of communication. Like, you and your wife know how you speak. If you change that, remember we talked about that poker face in the beginning? They're going to be like, something's up. You're bringing something to the table you're not telling me about. You're about to give me bad news. So it's really hard to employ it if you don't do it like slowly over time, because they're going to know something's not right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to need some tips. My wife wants to move to Florida when we retire. I want to move to Montana.
Okay.
We're probably going to compromise and move to Florida. So I need some negotiation techniques here that I can at least.
I'll be happy to help.
Can we settle in Oklahoma? Like somewhere probably not. But she can't be too far from Amazon, wherever. Montana's too far from Amazon.
Probably. No, I don't know. I don't know. I think Amazon's everywhere, man.
Look at those drones now.
Dude, I bought some Alp the other day, and it was delivered to me in 10 minutes.
Was the guy at Circle K or something?
He must have been. I don't think
the
lady, I have no idea how it happened. It wasn't even Amazon. It was Alp.
From the actual website.
From the website.
Wow.
It didn't even, and then it was like, standard shipping 3 days, expedited 2 days, something like that. And, $5.
But 10 minutes later?
10 minutes it was delivered. Immediately I pushed send. I got a text message back saying, your order will be, driver will be there or something like that. And in between these times, it was like 10 minutes away. It was a 10-minute window. And she was there in 10 minutes with the order. I'm like, I don't even know how that's even possible. Because the company is based out of Florida. So it's not like they're here.
If the company was your next door neighbor, that's still not possible.
It's one thing if they have a warehouse somewhere in Phoenix and then they got to pack it and drive it kind of like Amazon. But the driver was so close with the thing I ordered that in 10 minutes
if your next door neighbor ordered a rifle stock, it would take us longer than 10 minutes to get to it.
Yeah, I know. Have you ever? Well, I'm sure. Have you? You mentioned sending that angry text message. You find yourself ever doing that, even with all your training?
Personally?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Okay. Sure. Yeah. I'm not immune.
You're not perfect. Okay.
I'm not immune to anything. Nope. I do find myself, though, when I'm in my better states, I am a lot more mindful, bringing to the table the best version of me because of like what you talked about.
Yeah.
Because I know better.
Yeah.
I know better. I should know better. you know, how you word your emails to your boss, how you word a text message that you're going to be late because of a call out. I'm very careful. I try to be very careful. Do I mess up? Yup, all the time.
Yeah.
But you know where it's really helped me? I have a son who he lives in another city. Have to pick him up every other weekend, and I should say I get to pick him up every other weekend. And he's going into teenage age. But one of the things that helped me these last 7 years learning this stuff and diving into it is how I communicate, how I help him, how I talk to him, how I try and listen to him. And again, do I mess up? Yep, I do. Lose my temper sometimes. But he'll even say, Dad, you listen to me. You know, Dad, I know I can come to you with stuff. And that has been a huge factor is just your kids.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, like that was a lot packed in.
Yeah.
There was a lot in there. This is cool. Like, I think one of my like bucket list things was to talk to a negotiator. So check that off.
Check that. Yeah.
I feel like that was really cool. That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a unique and niche, and it's got all the characteristics of being awesome.
Well, and it is like you said earlier when we started. It's a position that's very heavily focused on in movies, crime movies, or you know, like there's always a negotiator comes in, and it's always like, you know, most times, every now and again, it's like, you know, the negotiator's like that nerd that can't really get it right, and some Twinkie eating officer comes in and saves the day, right? Because he's got a connection with his whatever.
Carl.
But mostly it's like a Denzel Washington type guy that comes in and just cool, calm, collect, runs the scene, and so it's in the movies, it's a pretty desirable position, you know, like it's always that.
Well, and that's how we all of us decide what we want to do. I'm sure you watched some fireman movies when you were a kid, and we're like, that's what I want to do, man.
I didn't. I had a very.
He's watching you.
To be complete, he's negotiating me right now. I can see it in his eyes. It's the unspoken communication, judging, and
no judgment at all.
No, I had two very distinct career paths that I thought I wanted to do when I was young. One was Secret Service.
Oh wow. Okay.
And then the other was CIA. I realized Secret Service wasn't going to be an option because if I was tasked with jumping in front of a bullet for a guy like Obama, I would be like, I'd do the Matrix thing. So that was not a good career path for me. I didn't, honestly, the firefighter thing came about because my dad was in construction framing. So when the economy was crap, housing was crap. In the winter when it rained a bunch, when we lived in California, you couldn't work. So childhood upbringing was kind of rough. Didn't have a lot of money. So honestly, it was just something stable. Literally, that's as simple as it was.
What shows did you watch that made you want to be in the CIA?
I think it was more just reading books.
Oh, okay.
You know, I mean, everybody.
Wasn't Hollywood?
It wasn't Hollywood. Man, if you look at Hollywood when I was a
cigarette
kid,
smoking man? Or?
Yeah, well, everybody smoked cigarettes back in the day for sure.
That was the cool thing to do.
But when I was young, man, Hollywood movies were. I mean, obviously, Die Hard is. Bruce Willis is my John Wayne, but. Not a lot of movies, probably books.
Yeah.
No, and that's interesting because your career path is similar to mine. I never pictured being a police officer, never. And the fact that it happened, the fact that I survived my fumbles, and you know, it just worked out. And it's been a great career. I will never say like, oh, I would have done it different. Nah. Are there things that I want to do now? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And one of them happens to be, you know, that mental health that's still tied to this, but would like to help firefighters, cops deal with all the stuff that we see.
Well, I think the city's better for you, better for that you have done that. You've chose that path. And, you know, being in the military, I get home and I know a lot of officers, and they say, "Oh, thank you for your service." But I sit here and I go, "You guys go on calls every single day. We're on deployment for 6 months, and then we come home for 18 months, and then we go back. But every single day, you got to go out there and perform. Every single day, you got a bad guy that wants to get you." So I think there's a lot to be said about police officers and the jobs that they do and the dangers that they put themselves in for the city and for the people of the city. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Well, Lorenzo, thank you so much for being here, man. This has been fun. Again, a bucket list item for sure. All right. See you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.